Coming up next on This Week in Law, we've got the PR industry represented from Phil Gomes. We've got the IT industry represented from Jason Watkins. And Evan and I are holding down the law for it. We've got Dennis Miller's brain, which is a stomach for pop culture. Is it whining or winning? We're not sure. We'll have to ask Charlie Sheen. The Pirate's Dilemma and Evan's retirement plan. All next on This Week in Law.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiL.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, recorded March 4th, 2011. Ice, Ice Baby. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by Hover.com. Hover is domain name registration and management that's simple. For 10% off your new domain, go to twil.hover.com. And by FreshBooks. FreshBooks, the easy online invoicing service that gets you paid quickly and makes you look professional. Get started with a free package at freshbooks.com. Hi, folks. This is Denise Howell, and you've tuned into episode 101 of This Week in Law. Really thrilled to have you with us today, and thrilled to have our guests, too, especially Phil Gomes, who is a senior VP with Edelman Digital. Hi, Phil.
Howdy. Pleasure to be here. Long-time listener, first-time participant.
Yes. Longtime friend. Great to have you on the show. And also Jay, who is, Jay, should I use your last name or no? I'm sorry, are you mute? Not hearing Jay.
Hello?
There we go.
Oh, I'm sorry. I accidentally sat on the mute button.
Yeah, that happens.
If we don't want his last name on there, you should let me know now, and I can take it off the lower third.
Yes,
no, that's
okay.
fine. That's fine.
Okay, so we've got Jay Watkins with us, who is an IT support specialist from the greater Philadelphia area. And we're thrilled to have Jay on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. This is excellent.
Cool, cool. And also with us is Evan Brown from Hinshaw and Culbertson in Chicago, Illinois, and InternetCases.com. Hi, Evan.
Hey, how's it going? It's great to be here.
Great to be here with you all. And I just want to take a moment to say how excited I am to have representatives of Phil's profession, the public relations profession, and Jay's, the IT support professional profession, on our show with us, and just give you guys a formal thanks on behalf of Evan, myself, and all lawyers similarly situated for keeping us gainfully employed when we are not on TWiL. So we really appreciate that because in all seriousness, so much of my work over the last several years has emanated from the sort of tension and dance that goes on within corporations and other organizations between the suggestions of the PR professionals that they work with and the needs of the IT support people that they work with, and also the fact that because of all of our information technology today, every single person within an organization has a voice outside the organization, it seems like. So I am anxious to explore all that with you guys on the show today. And in fact, I wanted to mention, I just noticed right before the show, I thought it was pretty funny that a really, really big law firm in the United States called Gibson Dunn has a new IT and data privacy group where I just thought it was interesting, Evan, you tell me if you agree, that they have lumped so many of these issues together under one umbrella as far as the services that this law firm provides. And they include everything from, cybersecurity and compliance to all of the nervousness that corporations experience around social media, and all of that is lumped under the same umbrella. So we're going to do the same thing in the show today, I think, or talk about why we shouldn't do that. And Phil, maybe with that in mind, I should kick it to you first, and just have you give kind of a big picture overview of the way in which the law crops up in your duties at Edelman and your work with clients.
Oh, sure. And I should disclose that I'm not a lawyer by training, though I do have a strong interest in such matters. When I think about the things that ring my phone the most, it really centers on employee policies and online behavior. And there's often, you'd mentioned sort of a dance between, lawyers and PR professionals and IT folks. And what we often find is, when we start an assignment, it's usually been most productive that everybody with a stake in that communication is around the table. So it's been lawyers, CIOs, HR, IR, public relations. And essentially, we air out everybody's, concerns perhaps with online community engagement, then whittle it down to some kind of policy that balances the attention and transparency that online communities demand and deserve, and the corporate communications needs and the reputation management needs of an organization. Very obviously, some of this has to be discussed in terms of I'd imagine with regard to law, I guess we're going to be talking a little bit later about the labor issue with American Medical Response. Because I think that's been an incredibly important case in terms of where a company's ideas of online behavior, sort of end, and somebody's off the clock behavior begins, and that sort of thing. So, I mean, what we found is that, it used to be that social media policies, some of them that I've seen, of course, a lot of them are published, but, focusing on it the way I do, I often, see some that aren't published. And, there's been a maturation process over the past several years where, some of the first policies I saw were something along the lines of this. It was like one sheet and it said, these are 5 names. Are you one of these 5 names? Then we don't want you talking online. Thank you. Goodbye. Right. And, that sort of way on the other extreme. And then there are ones that, famously some organizations have had online policies that are like 2 words, be smart, right? Which is hardly enough information to go on. So, I think what it really does come down to is that, and I think where PR folks and lawyers, try to find that glue logic in the middle is this notion that, the PR person, the communications person wants to, of course, communicate and achieve that as broadly as possible. Whereas, very often in the legal profession, it's in the realm of risk mitigation, right? So very often you go back and forth, and then it's almost like boiling it in a crucible. The absolute truth, at least for that organization, comes out at the end of that process.
Right, and I think you make a really good point there that it's not the same from organization to organization. It really comes down to what their corporate values are and what the vision is of the people at the top, and where they decide to make trade-offs, because you gain so much from being open in some ways, and yet, you lose perhaps things in other ways. I'm sure you try and navigate the waters so that, it's a win-win all around.
And I'd also have to say that the best policies make a distinction between, these are the rules that we expect you to abide by as an employee of this company, narrowly drawn. And these are, and then that's sort of bucketed in one set. And then the other set is, these are recommendations for what it really takes to be a good online citizen, right? And I think those have to be 2 separate discussions, right? Because I think if tenets of online citizenship are discussed dogmatically and prescriptively within the notion of what policies you sign on to be an employee, it starts to get pretty dicey, and it starts to really infringe on somebody's freedom of speech. So the 2 have to be discussed, I think, as separate discussions, but delivered in sort of the same policy or the same learning instrument.
Right. And I just, I'm so grateful, and I'm not sure what I would have done if my life just hadn't serendipitously gone the direction that it did. But in about 2006, I became my own boss. And that's about when my social media, beyond blogging, which you could argue is a form of social media, but, use of Facebook and various other ways in which we express our thoughts online. I think Twitter just came into being in 06, right?
Right.
So, I'm fortunate that I never had to really, as I increased my usage of those tools, never really had to deal with someone looking over my shoulder and judging whether I should say that, except for to the extent that, I have to be careful. I still represent clients. I'm certainly not going to talk about their business online. So I guess it's the same sort of a calculus that goes on for people who are employees within companies. But let's talk to Jay, who, today we're thrilled to have him on the show. I was gone last week and casting about for folks who were interested in coming on the show with us this week. And Jay was happy enough to volunteer on Twitter. And I'm so glad that he did, and glad to have him because, you're sort of a showcase of this issue that we're talking about. You have an important role in an organization. You have your own various social media presences, and I'm sure you're used to helping people in your organization negotiate theirs, but you've got to negotiate your own too. Do you want to talk about that for just a moment before we jump into our stories?
Certainly. One of the things I try to do with regards to social media is keep the two separate. One of the most important parts you can understand is that no matter what you put on Facebook or what you put on Twitter, anyone in the world can possibly see that. And I really don't understand how everything I put online can be interpreted. So I try not to mix the two, and I try to keep things at a positive level. If I'm upset, or if I have a funny story about someone, I really don't put that online. I try to make it helpful at the very least.
Mm-hmm. Evan gave me a funny comment yesterday because I was wandering around Target and found Gordon from the Thomas the Tank Engine series sitting atop the display of KY jelly, and snapped a picture and threw it up on Flickr and then my Flickr feed goes everywhere because it was darn funny to me. But if I were an employee within an organization, I would have to think twice about doing things like that. And I think I would have to. Some people don't. Let's jump into talking about someone who was not being quite so humorous. We've talked about her before and her case on the show, Dawn Marie Souza, who was an employee at American Medical Response. The National Labor Relations Board got involved in her case, and the upshot was they, indicated that they thought that the employer's communications policy, was too restrictive and possibly violated labor laws because what Dawn Marie was doing on Facebook could be construed as, unionizing, organizing activity, the kinds of things that the labor laws protect. So there's a really good piece in Time Magazine if you're looking for a nice overview of what happened here and what, actually it's at time.com. Who knows if it's in the magazine. But what happened here and what the implications are. So I recommend that. It is by Reynolds Holding. And Phil, have you seen a flurry of people updating their online communications policies in the wake of this to accommodate labor laws, or has this hit your radar at all?
It has. It's been hitting my inbox from several sources for the past couple of weeks now. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is that, for one thing, it doesn't seem to me that this is, again, I'm not the expert here, but it doesn't seem to me to be settled law, right? I mean, it seems to have been a settlement out of court and that sort of thing. I'm sure that there are, I don't work with any companies with which labor unions are a large factor. I mean, it's just not part of my client list at this moment, but I would imagine that is also a very large part of the of what of the details of this case, right? So, you know, I didn't, nobody certainly said, well, God, we got to strike this part out of the policy. Because actually, in the policies we tend to write, there's never anything that expressly says, thou shalt not say anything negative. However, when I look at something like this, there are a lot of policies that talk a lot about keeping private data private. You know, and the fact that, you know, what is properly water cooler talk or, you know, a closed door talk need not be splashed out over the internet. It comes down to, you know, educating folks about, you know, courtesy and decency, and the fact that not everybody lives a life online. And, you know, a lot of folks, especially millennials who come to the workplace who, you know, it's their first job out of college and everybody around them was, you know, online and lived a very public life in some form or fashion, you know, they kind of have to realize that, you know, it's not a good idea to tweet or otherwise post about that meeting that you had in the, you know, in the conference room, or again, water cooler talk or things like that. You know, so I in the light of this particular ruling, I strongly encourage folks to look at it in terms of, again, what is good online citizenship? And to me, what that person did, no matter, you know, how hard the boss was writing her or whatever, or however that worked out, you know, I really don't think that, you know, she really thought through the consequences of that particular action. So,
yeah, I think that's a good guess. Evan, Reynolds Holding, the author of this timepiece, concludes that, let's see, despite the unanswered issues, the case is an early and striking venture into the realm of workers' rights on the internet, and the message is reassuring. When it comes to Facebook and other new media, the old laws still work. Do you come away with that too? It sounds like Reynolds is fairly up on the fact that the NRLB came in and slapped the company on the wrist, at least indicated that it would if the case did not settle.
Right. I certainly like what he's saying there, in as much as it is indicative of eschewing what we talk about so much on the show, internet exceptionalism, thinking that the rules should be specially tailored and applied in particularly new ways because we're dealing with new technologies and new fora and new ways of doing things. So in as much as, you know, he's trying to have a relatively optimistic outlook on things by saying that, I get behind what he's saying and you know, am fine with that. It perhaps is overstating a little bit, because we really, as you've mentioned, or as I think Phil mentioned, you know, this is not anything binding. This is just an action that was filed but was resolved, so there's no precedential value whatsoever, no official formal precedential value. We can look at it and say, hey, this might be the position the NLRB would take, but other than that, we don't have much more than just a real nebulous kind of guidelines on things. What's one thing that I think we can take from this is, when we look at how things came out here and we examine how employers think when they're considering policies, you know, there were 2 or 3 different things that the NLRB was upset about. Only one of those was, you know, the policy prohibiting employees from disparaging the employer, talking about competitors and all that stuff. But focusing in on that one thing here, it's very difficult to overstate how much employers or you know, other powers that be within an organization are motivated by fear when it comes to this stuff, when implementing these policies. And that fear is in direct proportion, I believe, to the non-understanding of, one, how these technologies actually work, and 2, the practical effect of how these technologies can be used by people. If you're not a Facebook user, or if you're just a casual user, or, you know, if you're not a Twitter user and you're just not familiar with these things, and you're put in a position to implement a policy, the things that naturally are going to come into your mind, especially when it's your job to protect the interests of the company company and kind of you're inherently programmed to be risk averse, my golly, you're going to craft these policies to be as restrictive as possible, and think to yourself, it's a little bit like Pascal's wager. There's less to be gained from being open-minded about this than there is in really clamping things down just for the security of it. So let's prohibit people from saying anything whatsoever, because at least they won't be saying anything bad, forsaking the idea that there actually can be good to come out of this stuff. So with all of this, kind of bringing all of these notions together and what I've been talking about here, it's good if the old laws can apply. The traditional legal framework can apply. I hope that it certainly does, and I think that's the best way that these things usually work out when legal issues arise. Let's hope also that brick and mortar sensibilities prevail as well, and not be motivated for things to be too overly restrictive just because of some uncertainty or being a little bit behind the curve from time to time. That's how I see all of this stuff from a general level.
Well, and not making it about that one guy that messed it up for everybody, right? Which I think part of what you're saying there. I like that term internet exceptionalism, simply because very often what we encounter is this notion that there are rules, and then when you sit down at your computer, suddenly it's this great wide open frontier and there are no rules. And it's like, it's really interesting if you look at the average so-called social media policy, right? If you look at the average social media policy and the average corporate handbook, much of the former is lifted clean from the latter, right? Yes. And what's interesting to me is that the internet and the explosion of online communities and social media has such primacy now that organizations feel the need to produce another instrument to put in front of employees that in many ways, at least half of it reiterates what should already be in the company handbook, right? And that's what I've always found fascinating to me, is this notion of people sitting down at the computer and suddenly the amnesia ray hits them, right? And they forget about certain things, right? And then, it's not like when someone sits down at that computer, it's not like the rules in the handbook have gone out the window. It's just that the consequences of not following those rules achieve a much higher velocity online, and yes. I think that's the fear that you're talking about there. Is not so much a set of new rules, but the velocity that breaking the old rules will achieve online. So
right, and it's velocity on top of velocity. There's the inherent damage. I didn't mean to say inherent. That's the second time I've used a unique word, the same unique word, so foul on me. There's the bad stuff that can just happen, like when somebody says something bad on Facebook. But because these things are still so novel, and the fact that it's big news that Courtney Love settled a defamation lawsuit today for $430,000 for tweets. I mean, the fact that these bad things aren't just bad in and of themselves, but then they are bad. That badness is multiplied because of the attention that it gets due to the novelty of all this stuff. So, like I say, to kind of build on your metaphor, it's velocity, accelerating with more velocity just because of the self-reflective nature of the badness.
Right. And I'll also point to one more thing that I've noticed in these policies as they've matured. I mean, I've looked at this, most closely within the past 5.5 years. And what I have noticed too, and this is really interesting to me, is that, 5.5 years ago, everybody had a blog policy, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then somebody did something stupid on MySpace, and then panic. Everybody has to have a MySpace policy, and it's just on. And then Twitter. It's like, oh my God, we have to have a Twitter policy, and it just became death by 1,000 paper cuts at a lot of companies. And so, one of the things that we look at is what are the threads of commonality between different online platforms, right? And you find that when you find that there's really no need to author a platform specific policy, is that the tenets of online citizenship on one platform are pretty much the same on any other ones in terms of transparency, in terms of, behaving like a member of the community, in terms of listening first, in terms of being who you say you are. All those things are, pretty common across, everything from forums to blogs to Facebook to Twitter and so on and so forth. So, I mean,
that sounds great and looks great on paper, but in practice, when you throw Twitter in front of people, I think it all kind of breaks down, because I think Twitter is kind of this game changer. You were talking about the progression from blogs to MySpace or Facebook to then these 140 character chunks. And I think that there's something about the knee-jerk, rapid-fire nature of what people can do on Twitter. People that never blogged and maybe don't use any other social network are on Twitter now. Charlie Sheen, for example.
I don't know what you saw, but when that Twitter account went live, I just kept on hitting refresh, and he was gaining 1,000 users every time I hit refresh.
Right. No,
it was
crazy.
Frightening.
So, but for the rest of us who aren't, racking up 1 million plus users in a couple of days, it's still this terribly public channel. And yet people, I think, still feel anonymous if they have just a few followers or, I think there's something in the dynamic that goes on there because, as Evan alluded to, the opportunity to say something that can get you in $500,000 worth of trouble on Twitter is pretty real. And people
we're talking about an issue of velocity. Versus the act of publication itself. And I think the key thing about Twitter is, and this is a point that I wouldn't necessarily put in a social media policy, but the thing about Twitter is that, each tweet is individually addressable. So if you're trying to make a point, let's say it takes you 3 tweets to do it, any one of those tweets can be taken out of context, right? And I think that's more along the lines of corporate education and transformation with regard to social media rather than something I would put in a policy, right? And I try to keep those two things separate too. But again, the point's well taken is that we've seen lots of examples of things that exploded on Twitter that we probably couldn't conceive of in 2006, 2007, right? And I think that is a valid point.
Yeah. Hey, Jay, what does your organization do about Twitter? Can people use social media from work, and can they tweet from work? And have there been any issues about Twitter that have come up?
Yes, everyone here can use social media to their extent. I mean, the biggest thing that people are told is just think before posting. As far as the folks we support, there's a significant generational gap where we have some really young folks that are into Facebook, into Twitter. A lot of the departments and organizations here have their own Facebook page, they have their own Twitter page, whereas some of the people that are here a little bit longer aren't so much into that. And one of the things that they often try to do is come to us and just get a better understanding of what these services can provide. And one of the big things that I often repeat to them and to some of the younger folks is to basically never put anything online that you're not ready to say to the person's face.
So wait, I don't mean to put you on the spot here, and I'm not that kind of a host or reporter, but in getting ready for the show and getting to know you, I went and looked back at your Twitter stream, and there was something in there, a week or so ago about how bad the bandwidth was at your work where you were. And that's not like a terrible thing to say about your job, but you might, if someone from your job sees that and reads it, and they might not be too happy that you're griping about the infrastructure, especially you as an IT support person. I think even for someone as savvy as you, who goes around giving advice to people within your company, that, you got to know that all this is public. It's hard.
It's very difficult. There's some times when I want to take a Tommy gun and go to the wireless access point and just cap off a few rounds. That's probably what I was talking about on Twitter. But yeah, certainly. I think if I was to talk to the engineers about that, I'd be a little bit more diplomatic. as in the wireless does not give desired operation or something like that.
Is performing suboptimally at this time.
Right.
All right. Well, one group of people that for whom this is not terribly self-evident are, and I'm just going to let Phil comment on his pretty funny post about media training coaches and sportscasters. You know, the tweets from athletes are just incredible. I mean, one could write an entire law-oriented book about what these folks are doing, you know, and then another one about celebrities. But why don't you talk about coaches and sportscasters for a moment, Phil?
Yeah, I was inspired to write this this post, and the thing is, I don't act. The only sports I watch is World Cup every 4 years. Mm-hmm. and the Super Bowl. But I was inspired to write this during the Super Bowl in that, you know, I just started noticing that I guess it's an effect of, you know, leaning on the visual action in order to carry the story. And maybe the TV sportscasters' verbal skills have atrophied as a result, because I just remember there was this one part where the anchors went to the field reporter who was just in the Green Bay locker room or whatever, and she said that she talked to the coach, and the coach said, well, on defense we have to prevent them from scoring, and on offense we have to maximize every conversion or whatever. And I was just kind of like, well, wait a minute. Didn't he just say our defense has to defend and our offense has to, you know, score? Which it doesn't strike me as particularly brilliant. And a favorite one of mine is when coaches or players say, you know, we came to win. And I'm just like, really, guys, what did you come to do? Really? I mean, yeah, really. Is it some kind of, you know, I think I described it as highly expensive group therapy aimed at moderating excessive self-esteem, and it completely failed, right? You know, and you know, it's just one of those gripes I've always had about sportscasters. And then, you know, what did they try to do? Do you guys remember when Dennis Miller tried his hand at being an NFL sportscaster? It was a disaster, because the guy's brain is a stomach for pop culture. And, you know, and I actually heard a story about, there was a guy who, you know, was similarly brainy, and he had started like a email newsletter service where if you subscribe to his service, he would look up Dennis Miller's arcane references and email the definitions to you during the game, right?
Terribly valuable service.
Right, exactly.
Someone should do that for TWiL, by the way. If we could just crowdsource that little need, that would be great.
Yeah, so I mean that was a you know, a frustration that I had, and when I watched televised sports a lot more often in college, what I would find myself doing is that I would turn on the TV, mute it, and then go to the radio and turn that on, and that turned out to be an ideal sports watching experience. But yeah, what you saw in that post was a result of deep frustration. Also because I was rooting for Pittsburgh, but anyway.
Right. Well, as long as we're talking about Twitter and how it can be problematic for people, of course there are the wonderful parody accounts that we all enjoy so much, but can be, you know, a world of trouble for the people who create them, either because they're, you know, within an organization who doesn't sanction them doing that, or, you know, they just want to be a private citizen, and so one way or another, this thing has taken off and taken on a life of its own. I guess that just happened in your neck of the woods, Evan. You want to tell us about it?
Yeah, that's right. And you know, Phil and I both are in Chicago, so I'm sure this has been, you know, in his mind too. The Twitter account is @Mayor and it's, you know, was opened up a few months ago, soon after Rahm Emanuel threw his hat in the ring to, you know, become the mayor of Chicago. And it's, you know, it quickly, well, first of all, it churned out around 2,000 tweets just in the matter of months, and got up to 40,000 followers, and was just profanity ridden. There were all kinds of F-bombs. There's F-bombs in just about every tweet, which is a very slick parody of Rahm Emanuel. He's known for kind of having that rough edge despite his outward smooth appearance, would be one way of putting it, I guess. And so just recently, the author, the true author of this parody, revealed himself. He's a professor of journalism, no less, here at where was it, Phil? Was it UIC?
Columbia College. Yeah.
Yeah, and just a Professor Dan Sinker, and just brilliant stuff. If you go to @Mayor Emanuel, and that's at MAYOREMANUEL. Emanuel is kind of weird spelled there. It's just really hilarious stuff. And he kind of phased it out after the election, which was in the last part of February, where he kind of fades off into, what was it, a time vortex or something like that. So, so as far as it goes here, I mean, the way that this relates to another story, which was in our discussion points today, which was Twitter's temporary suspension of one of the fake Steve Jobs Twitter accounts. What was the handle on that? Because I know we got to be careful in our moments.
It was at fake CEO Steve.
That's right. And the one thing that when I read the Twitter suspending that, for violation of its policies against impersonation, it immediately made me think of the Mayor Emanuel account, because there was a quote from Twitter spokeswoman talking about the Steve Jobs account, saying that I guess it's the parody policy. It says that the site protects users' speech, but they've got to be clearly marked as such. In order to avoid impersonation, an account's profile information should make it clear that the creator of the account is not actually the same person or entity as the subject of the parody. So when you look at the Mayor Emanuel account, there was nothing that expressly said, hey, this is a parody. There was no parody tag or anything like that, but it was a picture of, Rahm Emanuel doing this, putting his nose to his thumb. And I've got to pull it up here. I'm not going to pull it up, but the little profile description was, what was it, Phil? Something like, I'm the next expletive MF mayor. Get used to it.
And to drilling down on the notion of parody a little bit more, it's like, is it really beyond the realms of imagination that Rahm Emanuel would be that foul-mouthed? No. I mean, he has this incredible reputation for being, particularly salty with his language. So, but I mean, I'm of the opinion, of course, obviously within the bounds of the law, Twitter is under no obligation to provide Twitter accounts under, according to any rules but Twitter's, right? But, and it's good that they accept that parody is a very big part of not only internet culture, but I mean, when you even think back to the founding fathers and the degree to which parody was used as a persuasive tool back then, I mean, it would be a shame if the law were to create a chilling effect. It's a popular legal term, I know, on parody, but if companies were, as a consequence, cowed into, maybe forbidding that, because I mean, I think the Rahm Emanuel account was funny, and of course there's now becoming a rich history of parodying Steve Jobs, and and it provides humor, provides commentary, and it's a form of it's a form of opinion making and speech that I think should absolutely be protected.
And it's great how Twitter really facilitates that, because it's it's easy to set these up, and it's not hard to find a photo to slap up on there and write some kind of trite little profile about yourself. And there are just countless accounts. I mean, like Al Qaeda, of course, has a parody type of presence, and famous thinkers. It's not hard to go follow Ralph Waldo Emerson, for example. Not so much a parody because there's not really a humor element to it, but there's all kinds of these parody the types of things. So one, it's interesting to look at how Twitter facilitates that, you know, the ease, the low barrier to entry, so to speak. But then it's also just really interesting to kind of examine at a fundamental level what parody is. And we're given a lot of kind of good object lessons or examples to look at here. And the Mayor Emanuel one does that very well, because you know, we all, well, I don't know if we all do, but many of us tend to conflate or confuse parody and satire. And as I understand the distinction, parody involves has as an essential element the idea of imitation, you know, where you're actually taking on the characteristics of the thing that you are intending to ridicule, whereas satire may not even necessarily be all that funny and still be satire, but it's kind of lampooning an idea or a notion. And so with parody, it actually has to be a little bit more clever, because the intelligence of the humor is relates to the extent to which you can imitate something without it being too over the top and just being, you know, clownish, and not even, if it's clownish to the extent that's not even funny, or and you don't want it to be too true to life, or you don't, you know, the humor doesn't emerge from the activity. So it's just really entertaining to see how you know, this can be done in a really optimal way by, you know, just kind of putting the sliding scale on the parody at the right point, and you can really get some great stuff. And this is just, you know, one example. So then, you know, of course, Twitter and its policy enforcement has to deal with that and make some judgments on where that sliding scale has gone too far.
Right. Knox Harrington is making some great points in IRC about, you know, how basically Twitter's trying to walk the fine line between allowing parody and satire, and I like that they've come out and said, you know, we're going to go ahead and do that, and feel free, have at it, but also trying to prevent identity theft and impersonating someone. You know, trying to defraud people. Knox Harrington gives the example of, you know, hey, I'm Steve Jobs, send me $500 and I'll send you an iPad.
Right.
That sort
That's
of thing.
just not funny. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just not funny. But, you know, I mean, presumably, it strikes me that Twitter's policy actually goes farther than it has to. I mean, I see why they do it, because and let me just finish the thought, by saying that you actually have to specify in the profile area of your Twitter page that you are not who you're pretending to be. Because if you're reading a Twitter stream that says you're CEO Steve, and you see a tweet that says iPad 2 is now 33% thinner and 50% more absorbent, you're going to know that's not Steve Jobs. I mean, that should be, you know, fairly self-evident.
Yeah.
So.
That's great, because I mean the policy, and I didn't look at the policy, I just looked at the quote from Doug Gross's article on CNN.com, but you know, he quotes, it says, and I think I read this before, so I apologize for repeating it, but it's worth saying it again. In order to avoid impersonation, you should, and here's the important language, should make it clear that the creator of the account is not actually the same person. So you don't, I mean, I don't read that to where saying you have to, like, you know, slap the word parody on there or something like that, but this whole process of making it clear, this is fascinating to me. You can make it clear, you know,
pretty muddy how you might make it clear.
Right, but through the actual content itself, you know, can be can make it clear. It doesn't necessarily have to be some kind of meta designation. It's just, you know, because it's just so because it's parody in the right mixture. It's thereby made clear. So, you know, we always try to give props to Alex McGilvray, you know, for over at Twitter, who's a friend of TWiL. So, you know, maybe this is another instance of his brilliance of kind of crafting this in the right way so that it fosters a robust development in this ecosystem.
Yes, I like to think so.
Certainly.
And Evan, you have something pretty interesting to talk about after we take a break here about child pornography laws and who exactly can be held accountable for them. It might not be your first thought, but in the meantime, I want to thank our sponsor, Hover. I use hover.com. Lots of us here at TWiT do. Hover is all about making domain registration and service simple. Over the years, domain registration sites have become more and more complicated. And I know this because I still have some with other sites that I'm slowly moving over to Hover as they expire. And just the process of even moving them from one site to another can be so complicated and, 10 menus deep. One thing Hover will do is they will walk you through that whole process. They have human beings when you call from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern. You get a no-hold policy for customer service. You can call them up and you can say, hey, I'm trying to transfer a domain and it seems really complicated on the site where I'm registered now. Could you walk me through it? And they have all kinds of FAQs and how-tos to do just that. So they make it super easy for you. And then once you're there, they don't sell you a ton of services. They focus on making it easy to register and manage domains and email. When you call, you get a live person. You don't get put on hold. You get their name. You can have email exchange follow-ups with them afterwards. And you can use their service to do much more than just manage domain names. You can set up email addresses, forward email addresses. You can get yourself a personalized email address above and beyond any domain names you have. They have a bunch of last names that they have registered themselves. So, Phil, I don't know, you might want to be Phil at Gomes.net. Apart from your Edelman life, we all of us have been talking today about how it's important to maintain these distinctions between our professional and personal online identities, and this is one way you can do it. You can get yourself a personalized domain from Hover, and then it's super easy to seamlessly integrate that with any other email that you have, and they have all kinds of guidance for that too. You can create URL extensions and personalize them with that domain that you're using there at Hover. You can set privacy controls, all with fewer clicks and without the website trying to sell you something that you don't want. To try their domain management service, Hover makes it easy to do that. You just enter the name of the URL you want to transfer, then Hover gives you the next steps and tracks the progress as the URL is transferred in. And these are free. These transfers are completely free. They do charge you $10 to extend the domain registration past its current expiration date at the time of transfer. Hover gives you Whois privacy for free. And for many people who usually purchase domain privacy with all of their domains, this means they'll pay less with Hover. So if you need a new domain, use the offer code TWiL and get 10% off. That's when you go to TWiL, TWiL.hover.com, and use TWiL as your offer code. Thanks so much, Hover, for your support. We love your services. All right, Evan, so tell us about this strange Kentucky federal case that involved sexting.
This was the first case that considered the question as to whether a minor who is accused of creating sexually explicit material of another minor and thereby distributing it runs afoul of the federal statutes that prohibit that. So the question presented for the first time, and this was a civil suit, it wasn't a criminal case, but still the analysis should be isomorphic to the criminal context. The question presented for the first time is whether a minor can be liable for distributing child pornography of other minors, and the question was answered in the affirmative. Yes, the minor can be liable for violating the federal anti-child pornography laws. So, though this case does not address the exact factual context, it's definitely analogous and very related to this question that gets everyone up makes everyone concerned, especially state legislators and local county prosecutors. This idea of sexting, the idea that if a minor is going to take a photograph, a digital photograph of him or herself, and then transmit that, usually by text message or by email or whatever to someone else, do they thereby, become a child pornographer? And I think the implication of this decision is that that would be a violation of federal law itself. Factually, this is a little bit different because the defendants here were 3 14-year-old boys who were alleged to have coerced, enticed, and persuaded a 14-year-old girl to make a sexually explicit video. So you know how those kids are. They made this video, and then of course they put it on the web, or they distribute it via the internet, is all it says. I don't know how they actually did it. And so then the section of the federal criminal code that prohibits the creation and distribution of child pornography also provides a civil cause of action. So this girl sued them, and the court granted summary judgment in favor of, or actually, I guess, denied their motion for summary judgment, saying that, hey, well, they made several arguments, but one of these is that, you know, a minor can't really be considered the one here to be the violator on all this. So there's a number of different issues that come out of this, and I think, you know, a couple of big ones are, obviously there are. The court is a little bit, was constrained to look at the literal text of the statute and consider this question of what does it mean to be a person. And it's not as profound or as metaphysical as it sounds at first blush, but the statute prohibits the possession, you know, the creation, transmission, possession of child pornography by any person. And so there's no definition of what it means. You know, the word person is not defined. In another part of the statute, the term identifiable minor is defined as you know, as a person. So the court did some, from a certain perspective, you could look at it as some weird defining of things here, almost a little bit circular, saying, well, an identifiable person is, an identifiable minor is a person, therefore a person would be an identifiable minor. So it's a little bit weird here, but really the court, construing the text as well as it could, had no choice but to conclude that there was really no way of getting around this question here. So in cases like this, yeah, these kids, you know, did a bad thing by filming this girl and distributing it. So there's no question that they should be held liable. It just, the extension of all this into the sexting context makes it much more problematic, because, and the other main point I wanted to raise on this is that there seems to be a real fundamental notion built into all anti-child porn laws of this disparity in power, and that the victim is specially victimized because he or she is a minor and is being taken advantage of someone who has totally different sort of power over them. It becomes odd when you start prosecuting kids who could, in some sense, be victimizing themselves. The penalties for distribution of child pornography exist, you know, in a different way than what, well, I mean, there actually are no penalties for non-obscene distribution of non-obscene adult pornography. So there's just this weird, anomalous specter of a completely more egregious type of liability that is here, and there's just seems a little bit, seems like something that is just not quite right in certain situations like this.
Yeah, it seems to me like this court may have gotten caught up with the fact that we want to discourage, you know, more bullying kind of conduct among kids, and that there's a lot of concern and proposed legislation toward that end. That this huge penalty-laden kind of consequence may not be, you know, the right tool to address the problem in this case.
Right. Had they been just 4 years older, it would have been perfectly protected by the First Amendment. It wouldn't have been an issue at all.
Yeah, really strange little case there. It is a district court case, so that means that it is subject to review, perhaps. It is a criminal case, so we'll just have to see what happens down the road with that. I think that it seems like an example of, you know, sort of square peg, round hole as far as the problem and the solution. So let's move on to talk about some copyright-related stuff. Evan, you pointed me toward the Sheen Family Circus. We have all been watching the Sheen events unfold all week, I'm sure. And for anyone who hasn't, just Google winning and you're likely to find a whole lot of funny stuff that Charlie Sheen has been saying both on Twitter and elsewhere all week long. So if you've got tiger blood and Adonis DNA, then you're likely going to enjoy what Evan pointed me to earlier this week, the Sheen Family Circus, which is interesting from a legal standpoint because it mashes up, I take it, verbatim quotes from Mr. Sheen and old family circus cartoons in a humorous way.
Well, what I think was also great, and it's a little frightening at the same time, New York Magazine has a great quiz where they have a series of 15 quotes, and you have to guess whether it came from Muammar Gaddafi, Glenn Beck, or Charlie Sheen.
Oh, that's great.
And I got 1 out of 5 right, and then I just gave up. I was just like, I'm terrible at this. But you know, so far in my Facebook, it looks like the best anybody's been able to do is 10 out of 15. So,
wow, yeah, those are good ones to mash up right there. Evan, do you see? We've been talking about parody. Do you see any legal issues about Sheen Family Circus here?
Well, of course, you know, I mean, there are issues, you know, as to how they ultimately should be resolved. You know, clearly, I think there's nothing to be up in arms about here. But, you know, if we want to be copyright literalists here and look at this, you know, there is a copying verbatim, or however you would talk about using the whole you know, the whole picture, you know, because Family Circus, as we know, is just, you know, a one-panel comic. So they're using the entire work, you know, the entire, at least visual portion of the work, and mixing, or, you know, mashing it up with something, you know, coming from somewhere else that, you know, may or may not have its own copyright issues. Are you going to, you know, is Good Morning America, ABC, going to assert copyright in, you know, individual segments of the Charlie Sheen interview? I don't know. But you know, looking at it from a literal standpoint, there definitely is two separate appropriations of works here that gives rise to something greater than the sum of its parts, a new work. And so it's just a nice, very simple little example of remix culture manifesting itself, taking two things that we're all familiar with and putting them together so that there's funniness that exists that didn't before, just by having assembled these two things. And I would think that benefit, I can't believe I'm getting ready to say that mixing up Charlie Sheen and the Family Circus is in the public interest, but, you know,
it most certainly is. Right.
With that said, you know, that benefit with a small b, you know, is greater than, you know, the overgrabbiness of the copyright owners in a situation like this.
All right, I would tend to agree with you, but I do think it raises an interesting point about, and I didn't put this in our discussion points, but it's something I read this last week. Another, you know, in the series of things that seems to come up about whether tweets are copyrightable, and this particular instance involved somebody's tweets being used then in another context and being cast as quotes, you know, as something that you've said publicly, and therefore, from a news gathering standpoint, it would be, I guess, the logic behind quotes in general in the journalistic context is that they are, it's probably a mix of, you know, a short enough chunk that it's not copyrightable, and there, if it is, there is a fair use consideration that would come into play to allow something to be quoted without having to get express permission. So, you know, that sprang to mind too when I read this, that taking someone's tweets and then putting them, or I guess these aren't tweets, these are just things that the man has gone around and said. But still, you know, the extent to which you can freely quote and remix raises its own whole host of legal issues. Jay, any thoughts on Charlie Sheen tweeting quotes or anything else?
Well, I definitely think if he has a quote in the public arena, that it's probably all right to, you know, just to quote or to even pass that on. I think it's personally hysterical. One of the things that really brings to mind with something like this, especially whether or not you can copyright it, is anyone be profiting from, reusing his tweets? I mean, I think you can certainly quote him, because I kind of liken Twitter to something you would say in a conversation. Like if you're in a bar talking amongst a bunch of people and someone else heard something you say and they could quote it to someone else. That's kind of how I see Twitter. I don't really see a big deal passing on something Charlie Sheen said. Would you want to do that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and it may be kind of where you can point to how copyright laws are anachronistic, because it only becomes a copyright issue because it's been reduced to a tangible medium of expression. You actually have to create text to make a tweet. That's a fundamental notion of reality. And so, the fact that we treat it more as conversational, and we may think of it, cognitively more as just conversation you'd be having at a bar or a cocktail party or, whatever, and clearly those things would not be copyrightable because you're not reducing it to a tangible medium of expression. As social media provides us with more opportunities to take on this conversational role through the technical use of media, it becomes a bit even more strained, and the application of copyright becomes a little bit more dissonant or something like that.
Well, folks probably know, because we've talked about it before on the show, and it's been much in the news, that the federal government, through ICE, have been shutting down websites before this COICA legislation that we've also talked about has even become a formal reality. ICE thinks they have the authority to do it now and has been out doing it by simply monkeying about with the DNS and making it so that sites no longer resolve to where one thinks they're going to go. So the other shoe has dropped on that, and there has actually been an arrest. And I want to get into that in more detail. But first, I want to talk about FreshBooks and thank them for sponsoring this episode of TWiL. FreshBooks is the easy online invoicing service that gets you paid quickly and makes you look professional. Get started with a free package at freshbooks.com. If you're a small business owner, consultant, or freelancer, you probably love having your own business, but you don't enjoy invoicing. Goodness knows I don't. Quickly and easily, you can create and send professional-looking invoices. You can upload your company logo to appear on your invoices and give them a more professional look. Your clients can download a PDF of the invoice, which is very convenient for them. You can receive payments for your invoices. Your clients can pay you via PayPal and 11 other electronic payment services, or they can pay with a credit card. There are more options that FreshBooks gives you. There are automated late payment reminders to follow up with clients. If you invoice by the hour, as is near and dear to our hearts in the legal profession, the time tracking feature lets you log hours and consolidate your timesheets into one invoice instantly. If you want to send physical invoices for a small fee, FreshBooks will print and mail them to your clients, complete with a return envelope at just $1.39 per invoice or less if bought in bulk. And you can use the FreshBooks iPhone app to track your time and invoice your customers when you're away from the office. As a lawyer, I really appreciate that kind of convenience to consolidate both your timekeeping application and your invoicing application. Really makes sense when you're billing by the hour. Over 2 million users have been sending and paying invoices with FreshBooks since 2004. Try out FreshBooks free today for up to 3 of your clients. It takes about a minute to set up an account. You go to freshbooks.com, you sign up, and when they ask you how you heard about FreshBooks, just let them know you heard about it right here on TWiL, TWiL. Every day, FreshBooks is giving away a birthday cake to one of our audience members, and it doesn't have to be your birthday to win the cake. FreshBooks draws a name every day for the entire month. So if you're interested in getting a birthday cake and some great invoicing services, that's freshbooks.com. We thank them so much for their support. So the folks over at ICE have been, and I should tell you exactly what that acronym stands for. It is Immigration, the U.S. Office of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. And they're the folks who have been shutting down a bunch of piracy-related sites, or so they say these sites are, by just shutting off the ability of those sites to resolve, a quirk based on the fact that so many of the domain registrars and registries are located here in the U.S. and thus subject to our federal government's jurisdiction. Now they finally arrested somebody, a 32-year-old Texas resident who was accused of streaming pirated sports broadcasts over his website, channelsurfing.net. That sounds awfully familiar to me. I hate to say that. I don't know, maybe just, I don't think I've actually ever used it, but it seems, was that like a pretty popular place to go? Do you guys know?
I wouldn't admit it.
By asking us to admit that, you'd be asking us to...
no, we're all a little bit leery of it.
So I think that's why that few seconds of deafening.
What was the URL again?
Channelsurfing.net. It's not going to resolve now, not since ICE got to it. But the kind of scary thing here is that Mr. McCarthy is going to, we were just talking about the stiff penalties for under the federal porn laws for minors. Pretty stiff penalties when you're talking about federal copyright infringement of criminal charges. The excellent point here at paidcontent.org from Joe Mullen in our show notes, which you can see them all at delicious.com/thisweekinlaw/101. Joe makes the point, entertainment companies had to engage in years of litigation to shut down sites like Grokster and LimeWire. And the idea of putting the creators of those sites in prison wasn't even on the table. McCarthy, on the other hand, will have to fight an uphill battle to keep himself out of prison at no expense whatsoever to the sports leagues, who, according to court documents, helped the government target his site. Evan, what do you think of this trend?
I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for him. This was written in a way, I think, to try to elicit sympathy for this defendant. But what he was doing was very different than the creators of Grokster and LimeWire and all of those. They were just providing the instrumentality whereby you could go do your own infringement. This guy was just, as I understand the allegations, was just taking this content and distributing it, wholesale. And he was charging for it directly. So, the criminal copyright laws are on the books to handle, those particularly egregious situations. There's a certain threshold that has to be met. You've got to, be doing it for commercial gain and sell, and sell something like $2,500 worth of the stuff in a 6-month period. It's a relatively low threshold, but it's more than just the casual person out there who might be taking a family circus panel and making something up with it. If what this guy was doing was really true, he was, he deserves to be accountable for that. And it's also to the same extent fair that the sports leagues should not have to foot the bill for that. Now, yeah, we as taxpayers are footing the bill for that, but I guess that's just one of those things that that we have to live with if we're going to, as a society, decide that certain things are so bad that they give rise to criminal liability. So, I don't mean to say that we should be taking this guy out and stringing him up without a trial and all that stuff. He'll have, all of the due process stuff, in place here. It's just that I would encourage not everybody to just naturally think that it's so bad that, somebody actually gets prosecuted criminally for copyright violations. Let's just wait and see what happens.
Yep. Sage advice. Phil, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Evan on this. Is that as I was reading this article, it was kind of like, well, I feel like I'm expected to be sympathetic with the with the protagonist here, and it's like, no, I'm actually not. I guess I am a bit conflicted. I believe very strongly, people who own copyrighted works have every right to protect them. The point about the sports leagues not having any financial skin in the game is it's a decent point, I guess. I don't know how far that. How far that would actually go if you kind of took that to its logical conclusion. I guess the question is how far are the sports leagues willing to go? So, for example, if I'm sitting on my couch with my laptop and I'm tweeting a play-by-play Is that an actionable offense? I would imagine the sports leagues would argue yes, right? Because
I'm pretty sure they would, yeah.
Right, which strikes me as ridiculous, and that's why I'm kind of torn by this. And it's interesting. I volunteer for an annual open source conference that happens here over at University of Illinois Chicago, and I sometimes find myself torn between sort of two worlds, right? One that richly believes that all information must be free, right? The whole Richard Stallman, Stuart Brand kind of thing, and then some of us on the other hand that say, well, copyright ownership and patent and that sort of thing all should mean something, right? And so I'm looking at this going, it's clear that we have an agency that wants to make an example out of somebody. I guess I'm just concerned about what kind of slippery slope this could turn into, and again, whether or not relatively innocent examples like the Twitter example I just described, whether or not that's something that the sports leagues are going to go after.
Yeah, because again, you've got Twitter coming in and throwing a wrench into things as people are watching, and maybe they're watching a blacked out game in other regions. Just in their sheer fan-oriented exuberance, they may feel compelled to give a blow-by-blow without actually thinking about the ramifications of that. And again, because Twitter is so immediate, it's the kind of thing people just do without even thinking about it. Jay, any thoughts?
I think the $90,000 that he earned is the exact catalyst that kind of threw him into action. I mean, aside of the fact that he just got caught, and that he should be held accountable, like Evan said. I think the fact that he made some money off of this, in addition to making content available he wasn't licensed to do so with, I think that has a lot to do with it.
Right, and that really is the threshold for criminal liability. I mean, not 90,000; it's actually much less than that. But the way the copyright laws are written, nobody's going to get in trouble just for doing a play-by-play. Nobody's going to be criminally liable for just a play-by-play on Twitter, because anybody, even the most conservative pro-IP ownership camp, is going to have a hard time saying with a straight face that you're going to be able to extract, for commercial gain directly from that. And that's my word, inserting the word directly in there. That's not in the statute. But, it's really the criminal stuff there. Again, it's a pretty high threshold, because it's got to be somebody who truly is a purloiner, taking this stuff, repackaging it and selling it and making lots of money from it. That's really got to be the distinction here. And so, I don't feel too uncomfortable thinking that, anybody's rights are going to be trampled upon, not only with the threshold that would have to be met just to get a federal case on file, a federal indictment for this, but then also, the burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, all of this stuff, that's higher in a criminal context. So I don't think we have a whole lot to worry about.
Yeah, just in a bigger picture sort of way, it comes back to the point that we talk about all the time on the show, and that is, from a business standpoint, folks who are copyright owners, I think, need to be taking a longer view and a more practical view toward piracy and how they address it and get rid of it. The reality is that the reason this happened, the reason this guy was able to make $90,000 is because people want that kind of access to this material, and they weren't getting it. So if you're not going to give it to them, piracy is going to be the result. And, it's interesting to talk about this against the backdrop of just this week, the announcement from Amazon that their Amazon Instant Service is now available with over 5,000 titles for free to subscribers who are already members of Amazon Prime or people who become members of Amazon Prime, which, talk about, to quote freely from Charlie Sheen, winning. Oh my gosh, what a great concept. I am so excited about all this and think that Amazon did a great thing. And the discussion that I've been hearing around it is, oh, well, they'll never take down Netflix. Who bloody cares? This is a great adjunct to the services that are already out there. An incredible benefit for people who are already paying for Prime, which I think there are a lot of us. I've been doing it for a few years and, feel like it pays me back in spades because of all the physical goods I order from Amazon. So it's just, if the funny thing about it is that the content producers are leaving it to people like Netflix and Amazon to wrangle with them and then ultimately provide this service that people are clamoring for and that will enable lawbreakers to make allegedly $90,000 by providing their stuff in an unauthorized way. So, there's my rant on that. Follow the Amazon example, negotiate with these people, make deals with them, and make your material available because otherwise you're just going to pay the price. Anybody else is excited about this as I am and think it's a big deal? Evan?
Well, I have 2 points, actually. I mean, one is, I have a Roku box at home, right? Mm-hmm. And I get both Netflix and Amazon streaming through there. And we tried Amazon for the first time the other day. It was a Social Network, actually. My wife and I watched the Social Network. And, it's an entire library that, isn't on Netflix, right? And both companies are going to have to write very large checks and send them southward to Hollywood. There is some debate on how sustainable that is, but when you bring up piracy and distribution models, I don't know if anybody here has read The Pirate's Dilemma by Matt Mason.
No, that sounds like a good one.
Oh, I'm not much for business books. I remember starting out in my career, just out of school, people had like a gun to my head that, you have to read, Crossing the Chasm or else, right? And it just soured me to the business book genre for a very, very long time. And then it was actually on a client assignment that I discovered The Pirate's Dilemma by Matt Mason, which came out around 2008 or so. And his central thesis is that if you are a goods or content provider and you see piracy in your market, congratulations, people have done the hard work of figuring out inefficiencies in your distribution model. And that's the central thesis. And he walks through how that pirate mentality wasn't just something that emerged with Napster or was quasi pseudo neo solved by iTunes. They look at he takes it as far back as like the birth of disco and the birth of punk, and Denise, to exactly that point you were talking about. I think it's a really great book, and what I like about it is that it's a marketing and business book that speaks to my generation. Right, mm-hmm. It talks about the punk movement and Richard Hell and all these folks, right? It's like, and it talks about LL Cool J and and the hip hop movement and everything. It's like you're reading, it's like I'm like, yes, I can get into this, but it's a great book that again I picked it up about 3 years ago and it still stands up and it really talks to exactly the point you're making there.
Yeah. And just by even, I've been hearing that, the knock on Amazon Instant linking to Prime has been, it's only 5,000 titles. That's just not very much. Can't compete with Netflix or Hulu or other things that are out there. But those 5,000 titles are like a gateway drug. Once you know that, what is it? Exit Through the Gift Shop is one of the things, and I highly recommend that for listeners of this show. It's a documentary film about the street art movement, and it is one of the 5,000 titles that I probably never would have watched if I hadn't just stumbled on it there in the new services that are available. And as one of the subjects of the film, his name is Banksy, I guess a world-famous street artist. One of the points he makes is they operate in a bit of a legal gray area. So if you're interested in that sort of counterculture and how they manage to do what they do, it's a great movie. And again, it's one of the 5,000. But for folks who are just trying it out and getting a taste of it that way, you might watch that and then figure out that, over here on the paid side of the equation, where it's more like the cable and satellite pay-per-view model where you pay $4.99 for a movie. There's, you know, a huge variety of stuff as well. So they're going to get people not only that are paying the Amazon Prime subscription, which is no small amount, $80 a year, and also people who are going to pay by the chunk as well. So, you know, I think it's a business model that will go far and that combats exactly what you were saying, Phil, and this the pirate's dilemma kind of issues. Real quick before we move on, Evan, any thoughts on business models and copyright and piracy?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. I guess the one point I would make on all this is that there's probably more to do with economics than there is law when it comes to all of this stuff. And the smart business person will look at these questions as economic questions, with law merely providing the backdrop for them. That's what I would take, especially in this whole thesis of the pirate's dilemma that you're talking about, Phil, with, you know, them doing the hard work, recognizing it as a supply and demand issue, and then just figuring out how the legal framework should support where the real business is done in terms of dollars and cents and supply and demand.
So, Jay, a few years back when I was still with a big firm, one of the big things our IT department had to keep up with was the fact that people were watching, were using the organization's network for illegal activities like file sharing and peer-to-peer and otherwise engaging in privacy using the company resources. Is that something that has come up for you, or in the era of streaming and with the fade of P2P, is that just no longer a concern?
Well, we take a pretty significant approach to P2P and things like that. Any illegal file sharing or anything like that is just not something that's condoned or even supported. We find anything like that on a machine, we remove it almost instantly. Not to say that BitTorrent and those type of utilities are all for those type of purposes. We kind of know what they're used for. I mean, as far as streaming, we've kind of gone the other way. During President Obama's inauguration, we set up basically in the auditorium the stream of the inauguration and just had everyone go in there because we kind of knew they were going to be at their desktops doing it anyway.
Yeah, why use all your network resources? Just put it in a centralized location.
Yes. So yeah, we don't really see too much of that. I mean, we had a couple, I don't want to say takedown notices from the RIAA, but basically, you know, we found some stuff on an IP of yours. Can you take care of that, please?
Right. So have you had instances of people who needed to be legitimately using BitTorrent or other P2P software who needed to come to you and say, hey, you know, don't block me because I need to use this for work?
A couple times, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's good to know. All right, so we're getting down to the time of our tip and resource of the week. Our resource of the week comes our way via JD Lassica, a friend of mine and a former guest on TWiL. JD attended the launch conference, which I would very much have liked to go to, but had to be in Southern California. Actually, maybe I was in Utah at the time. But there at launch, he saw the company Law Pivot and was impressed by it and sent it my way. It's worth checking out. It's at lawpivot.com. And we've been talking about the legal concerns for companies a lot on this show. This is crowdsourced and confidential legal advice for companies. So what you do is you send a confidential question into Law Pivot. They identify the right lawyers for your question, and then you receive multiple answers from lawyers, saving money and time. So I assume that they're going to have to build up a network of lawyers who will answer questions for folks submitting here. I think it's a neat idea, and it's worth checking out as a resource of the week. I can think of some issues with it, though. And one of them, Phil, has to do with your post about Quora, that you were not real thrilled with your experience there and have sort of decided to stop participating there because you felt like you couldn't really give 100% great answers to the discussions and the time that was necessary. And I could see that being a kind of a problem for this sort of community as well. Do you agree?
I do, especially if it's, you know, Well, like I said in the post, you don't have to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something. Here I am on a show called This Week in Law, right?
Exactly.
But I guess my frustration with Quora is that, I find that the social media tools that I enjoy the most are the ones that can be used in a single motion based on the other activity that I have online, right? And I guess my issue with Quora was it seems to demand a certain amount of attention, and I guess part of the frustrating thing was, a lot of the answers were, well, I'm not an expert on this topic, but, and it seems to me that participating in Quora sort of presupposes expertise, right? In whatever field you're contributing to. So, I found myself really, really participating, for the first 2 weeks I was exposed to it. And then I kind of realized it's like, is this, it's part of my job to be familiar with these tools. And so I was like, is this really the best use of my time? And I guess what I came away with it, how I came away with it was, if I were to make a recommendation to a client, I could see how something like Quora would be interesting if I was maybe trying to advise a client to develop a cult of personality around like a rock star engineer, and maybe was looking to hire young engineering talent that they would bring under this rock star engineer. Maybe Quora would be a good place to sort of develop that relationship. So I was thinking of things like that, I guess, from a recruiting standpoint, or maybe even to some degree a customer service standpoint. But for me, in terms of my job as a PR person, I didn't find a lot of value in it for me. And I guess part of it was that, as I also said in the post, is that, when you talk to certain experts, that expertise has a certain value. And, and it's, I'm sure the legal advice and content on this show is perhaps much different and not in as much depth as the legal counsel and advice you give when a paying, when a paid arrangement is sort of built, right? So, I found myself going in there and saying, okay, I'm going to participate, and then I found myself saying, like, sort of okay answers to okay questions, and then after a while, it just sort of died off, and so I pop in there every so often just to kind of keep familiar with that certain platform, because it I may have the chance it may present itself as something that I would want to recommend at some point. But I guess for right now, in terms of being sort of that online hub of, high level expertise, it just wasn't that for me. And I wasn't, I guess, willing to put in the energy to help make the PR tag, live up to that standard. So,
So yeah, that's the kind of a danger that kind of online community can suffer from. Evan, as you look at this law pivot, do you think that our fellow colleagues in the legal profession are quaking in their boots, thinking, oh, these people are stealing our legal work, or do you think that lawyers will just look at it as another form of lead generation? You might answer a couple of questions and then get into a more in-depth representation that's actually compensated.
Yeah, those are at least a couple of different ways of looking at it. One, quaking in your boots, looking at it also as lead generation, and the other just might be more of a public service for the same reasons that lawyers have for 15, 20 years contributed to forum boards, answering questions, or why you might answer a question on LinkedIn, or even to a certain extent why you might write a blog. I mean, my motivations for writing a blog are certainly different than that. I find it just, very satisfying in and of itself to analyze this stuff and to share it and all of that stuff. And the fact that it may generate a lead for me, the prospective client, or a speaking engagement or a media appearance or something like that, is just kind of a nice side effect of all of this stuff. So I certainly am not quaking in my boots, and I don't think a reasonable response from lawyers should be to quake in their boots like that, because regardless of how much information is out there and how many different tools there are, like Law Pivot, which is particularly geared to the law, or Quora, which has a lot of questions being asked and answered about the law, nothing. I'll venture to say that nothing will ever replace that attorney-client relationship and the importance of that, and the things that can only truly be accomplished with any level of quality in that type of relationship. And there's also a certain good thing that's mutually beneficial having something like Law Pivot or Quora there. It's great to have all these these places where the simple questions can be asked and answered. It's like, it's not going to do me any good from my bottom line to have a client call me up and ask me a simple question that I can't in good conscience really charge them for, like a simple question like, what should a copyright notice say? Should I use a TM or a circle R? That's an easy question that can go that's good for something like this. But if somebody is looking for the answer of what should I do now that I have been sued in federal court for, 7 different causes of action, and the FBI is on my trail? I don't think Law Pivot's going to have much of a purpose there, and it wouldn't provide a threat to all of that. One more point, with Quora and stuff and these types of things, my fantasy, I guess, would be to be retired someday on an island in the Caribbean with an iPad and just kind of hang out there all day answering questions. And I also think of this a lot the same way that I participate as an author on Wikipedia. I am drawn to those subject matters that are not within my professional expertise, but the things that I just happen to know about through circumstance or something I'm interested in as a hobby. The articles that I've edited on Wikipedia are about, little towns and, close to where I grew up. Just little things like that, things that are just more kind of interesting from a knowledge kind of knick-knack perspective. I don't find as much satisfaction in that type of participation, answering questions about copyright and privacy and trademarks and all that stuff. But, maybe if I were retired and didn't have people ask, willing to pay me money to answer those questions anyway, I would find that more satisfying.
Exactly. Jay, any thoughts on this sort of a crowdsourcing of services that would otherwise be offered in-house?
I think Quora is very interesting, but the first thing that I saw in it was the opportunity to become a free consultant. And it's not that I would mind helping people or giving basic answers to things like that, but the opportunity to kind of get yourself involved in a situation where you're providing more information than you would probably want to or need to is more apparent. Like, I would be comfortable with telling someone what they needed to do as opposed to exactly how to do it. Because, say, for example, someone comes with a computer issue and I tell them they need to do this, that, and the other thing, and they wind up losing all of their data. Now, am I responsible because I told them how to proceed? So Quora is very interesting, but it definitely has that catch where it's nice to look at, and maybe I don't want to get that involved with it.
Yeah, you're right to be cautious along those lines. Hey, I got some great news from the studio as we were chatting that our own Dr. Kiki just this morning had her baby. She tweeted out 2 hours ago, "I would like to announce the birth of my son, Kai Addison, or Nano, today, March 4th at 7:49 a.m., 6 pounds, 2.5 ounces. Congratulations, Kiki. That is awesome, awesome news.
Congrats.
Congratulations.
Just great.
Diapers and pins, now the fun begins.
Exactly. Hey, so our tip of the week has to do with if you're planning to leak any confidential information from within your organization to, say, someone like Julian Assange, please, 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 by all means, be sure not to be aiding the enemy when you do this. Because if you are doing something that could be construed as aiding the enemy, the federal death penalty could apply. And that is something that's being mulled about this week as far as the WikiLeaks case. We've got the federal death penalty possibly on the table, and there have been a lot of people saying, no, they would never seek that. against. Now, what was the private's name who did the actual leaking? I had it here in front of me.
Bradley Manning.
Bradley Manning, thank you. Yeah, I've had a lot of people come back and say to me, there's no way they would ever seek the death penalty against this guy. It would be political suicide. But at the same time, even though the prosecutors have said they won't do it, the Military District of Washington commander, Major General Carl R. Horst, is the person who gets to make the final decision on that. He doesn't have to follow the prosecutor's recommendation, and he could refer this for trial as a capital offense. So, who knows if that would actually happen. But since we've been talking a lot today on the show about things that go in and out of an organization, whether under its various policies and procedures or in flagrant violation of them, you might want to bear in mind that there's some pretty stiff penalties out there that can attach. So that's our tip of the week. Any thoughts, Evan, about this guy? Do you think they would ever seek the death penalty against him?
Who knows? Stranger things have happened. I mean, look at, the Rosenbergs back in the 50s, and Sacco and Vanzetti, whenever, So, I mean, who knows? Again, this is, I kind of feel this way like I do about the criminal copyright infringement stuff. I mean, is our response supposed to be, oh my gosh, this is outrageous that they would even think of going after the somebody, imposing the ultimate sanction on somebody for aiding and abetting an enemy of our country? And I'm like, well, hell yeah, they should, if there really is, if somebody's going to disclose information to, it seems like every episode I keep just making this dramatic, Al-Qaeda is going to blow up all of our buildings, references. But I mean, if somebody's going to give, some kind of information that will make it likely that Al-Qaeda is going to fly into my office building and kill me and my coworkers and leave my wife and children without me, well, let's not go there. They might enjoy that. By golly, there should be something in the law that strings that asshat up and makes him accountable for having done that. So it's not too hard, as you can tell, for me to work up a little bit of righteous indignation for those extreme situations. Whether or not that's appropriate here is far beyond my poor power to tell. But I have little tolerance for just knee-jerk reactions, thinking that in every situation this would be a miscarriage of justice to put someone to death for jeopardizing our national security.
Whoa, yeah. I guess I just have a lot more sympathy for the guy. I don't think he knew what he was getting into, and I mean, maybe he wanted to make a statement or what have you, but gosh, to face the death penalty for leaking information.
Well,
and, I mean, you're right. Stranger things have happened. Yes, Phil?
And I think lost in all of this is what was a private first class doing with access to this treasure trove of cables, right?
Yeah, it's an IT
I think
issue.
that's one question that I think for some reason it's like we're expected to work up this froth of righteous indignation because I think perhaps the government wants us to see past the fact that an incredibly low-ranking person within the U.S. military had access to all these cables. Number one, number two, I'm certainly not going to debate matters of capital punishment and the death penalty. But one of the things that struck me about the cables is that it didn't seem like, at least the ones that I saw, were like really huge national security issues, right? I mean, they seem to be rather routine, and I mean, it would be, and I know that very often the law is not a matter of degree, but to reach a judgment of what Evan called the ultimate sanction based on things that were really inside baseball and not really the bombshells that I think they were originally supposed, rumored, or marketed to be. I think that those are all the questions that people are going to be wrestling with this particular case, because and it kind of surprises me that the internal information security discussion is not has not been really thoroughly explored in the public space.
Yeah, I totally agree. What do you think, Jay, as an IT specialist?
I think PFC Manning was an analyst, so he was probably just separating the wheat from the chaff as far as the cables go, since there were so many of them. And I also
you think he probably had complete access to them, and it was his judgment call. It wasn't like he was, accessing secure documents that he otherwise shouldn't have.
Right. I think the way that the military implements their access control versus how they do access control on a computer-based system, I don't think they're aligned as perfectly as they could be. A lot of times I understand it's either all or nothing. And since he is at a lower level, he was probably doing a lot of grunt work for people higher up so that they wouldn't have to spend a lot of their time going through information that probably isn't worth them looking at. The Uniform Code of Military Justice is also a different set of rules, if I understand correctly, and it's a lot more harsh. I mean, I remember when I was in boot camp, the big thing for that was if you were to desert in a time of war, that there was a death penalty offense, they could wage that against you. And that I don't think that's ever happened, but it was still the certain thing. The government, I personally think that he was looking for a headline, and he definitely found it. Unfortunately, to his bad luck.
And continues to find them. All right. Well, with that, we will go ahead and wrap up this episode of This Week in Law. Really enjoyed chatting with you all today. Thanks so much for joining us, Phil Gomes from Edelman.
Thank you.
Phil, where can folks find you? And is there anything you'd like to plug before we sign off today?
Sure. I am the most Googleable Phil Gomes of the Phil Gomeses that are out there. And there are a few. I've gotten threats over my philgomes.com domain name. I mean, while we're talking about matters of identity and stuff. But if there's anything I'm going to plug, actually, yes. If there are any listeners here in the Chicagoland area who are passionate about technology and open source and the freedom to innovate, I volunteer for an organization called Flourish, which is the University of Illinois Chicago's annual conference on open source, and it's our 5th year doing it. My wife and I volunteer, and we've got a lot of really great talks this time around. We've got the VP of Technology from Threadless. We've got the one of the people from the Document Foundation talking about LibreOffice. We've got Ryan Gordon, who goes by Iculus, and he talks about 3D gaming on Linux. And for law folks on here, Dahlia Saper of Saper Law is going to talk about open source copyright and patents. So in our 5th year, we've gone from 1 to 3 days, and it's going to be quite cool. It's April 1st through 3rd at the University of Illinois Chicago, 750 South Halstead Street.
Fabulous. Thanks so much for that. And folks can follow Phil. He's at Phil Gomes on Twitter.
I am at Phil Gomes. All the ways to contact me you can find at philgomes.com.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Phil. Great chatting with you.
Likewise.
And Jay, I really appreciate your jumping in and volunteering to come on the show. It was a real thrill to have you, and we've loved having your perspectives from the inside. Anything you would like to mention as we close?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. This was great. I've never done anything like this before. I've done video Skype with people around the world, but not to a very large audience. I'm pretty simple. My biggest place online is Twitter at JScript. That's me. And my flavors.me page. I keep it pretty simple.
Yes, an adorable daughter, and links to all the other stuff that you do online. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Evan, great to chat with you as always. Anything on your mind this week?
No, I've already exhausted it. I can't think of anything more to say, but thanks a lot for having me. This is a fun conversation. I think it was a real interesting composition of our panel today. So I don't know about you, but I have thoroughly enjoyed it. Great to talk with you, Phil. Great to talk with you, Jason. Hope we can stay in touch.
Yeah,
Yep.
likewise. Denise, thanks for inviting me. I had a great time. This was awesome.
Sure. It's always fun for us. So I'm really thrilled that you were able to make it happen with us. And folks, be sure and follow Evan online too. He is Internet Cases on Twitter, and internetcases.com is his excellent blog. So
thank you.
we'll see you hopefully next week. We record live every Friday at 11 o'clock Pacific time at live.twit.tv. And in the meantime, go over and check out our Facebook page where we put up pre-show questions. Love to get your feedback there at facebook.com/thisweekinlaw. And with that, we'll sign off and see you next week. Take care.